Hello, this is the Green Corn Rebellion show, and today I am here with Doc Coyle, the lead guitarist of the band Bad Wolves and host of the X-Man podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, doing well. I just ran out of coffee, so we have to get that refill in a little bit. But I have water, so it's all right. It's all right. I have talking fuel.
All right, cool. Well, the first question I have here is what got you into playing music?
Yeah, I started out. I think something happens to kids once they kind of reach that. I guess the hormones start flowing, their bodies start changing, and that adolescent time, kind of between 11 and 13, and at the same time you start to notice like boobs and stuff. You start for some reason you start getting into music and wanting to play an instrument, and this is in the early 90s and kind of at the height of MTV and all that. And so I started, I discovered MTV. Megadeth Symphony of Destruction was on, and I was just like, it was like this whole world opened up. And then right around the same time, Wayne's World came out, and then it had the Queen song, Bohemian Rhapsody, and it was like just something kind of clicked about those kind of two moments where I was like, I need to watch this MTV thing, and and then I discovered Guns N' Roses and Metallica and Alice in Chains and yeah, somehow I just wanted to play guitar, and I fumbled on this old beat up acoustic somehow and just started plucking around on it. And my dad ended up getting a guitar from his girlfriend at the time, it's Ibanez Les Paul, as a graduation present. But it was like a loaner guitar. It wasn't really mine to keep. But I started playing, my brother started playing, and it just kind of started from there. And at the time I was drawing comic books, my brother and I, just being creative in that world. And then we would actually like draw comics and then listen to metal and music. And then it kind of, the music kind of eventually just overtook the art and became kind of our main thing and our obsession, So, and then it just went from, the Metallicas and Guns N' Roses to, we started watching Headbangers Ball, and it was Pantera and Sepultura and Slayer, and then we discovered death metal, and then we discovered the hardcore scene, and it kind of just went to all these different places and wanting to push things with the instrument. So
That's cool. Yeah, I started playing trumpet when I was about 10 in fifth grade and kept up with that until college. Then I stopped in college. So yeah, that's pretty cool. And who are your biggest musical influences?
well, I mean, it really goes to the time, because when I was first started playing guitar, first getting into music, is all the stuff I mentioned, GNR and Metallica and Pearl Jam and all that stuff. But when I really started kind of getting into guitar, it was really, Megadeth, Marty Friedman and Dave Mustaine were huge for me. Slash is still my favorite guitar player. Dimebag, I got really into Randy Rhoads, Ozzy, the live album, the tribute album was like really big for me. Van Halen one, I loved, and that was like a really kind of game changing record for me. Testament, Alex Skolnick, his lead guitar playing style was very influential. And then then I started really getting into a lot of the Swedish and kind of melodic death metal stuff. Bands like Carcass and At the Gates, In Flames, Soilwork, Arch Enemy, all that stuff had a really big influence in me kind of in later years. And then kind of, around 2000, 2002, 2003, 2004, I started kind of going back and rediscovering classic rock, and listening to the Beatles and Pink Floyd and Led Zeppelin, and even expanding, to kind of stuff that was modern at the time, but more eclectic, like, Radiohead, and just more like experimental music. And I kind of, I had a very, I guess, obtuse way of looking at things within the context of extreme music. And I really felt like I was like lacking broader context. So I just started, and then, and like the last, so around that time, like probably my favorite modern band is Muse. and that's been like the most influential band to me in recent years, you know, because they're just really dynamic, obviously great guitar playing and really you know, kind of groundbreaking in that respect, but just from a songwriting standpoint, from an ambition standpoint. So it's I have this real grounding in super heavy music, underground music, but you know, I always thought it was really important to be influenced by everything, you know, and within that I've always been, you know, I've been a hip hop fan. I like, you know, to me, you know, top 10, you know, Michael Jackson to me is up there with Metallica and, you know, anybody, you know, so it's like I've always been influenced by everything, and I try and really use the history of music as like my teacher, you know, like I get to do this band called Mass Mental and the Wedding Band with like Rob Trujillo from Metallica. It's a lot of funk tunes or a lot of Black Sabbath stuff I didn't really grow up playing, but I've learned recently, and that just becomes part of your kind of educational library. And when you can draw upon broad musical influences, it helps you in creativity and songwriting and everything.
All right, cool. Were you ever into Limp Bizkit?
Hell yeah. Hell yeah. It's funny. I didn't really, I mean, I probably heard them when Faith came out, just kind of like everyone else. But it was really the album Significant Other that I really liked. And then the album after it, Chocolate
Chocolate
Starfish.
Starfish. Yeah.
Those two records I liked. That was the thing about me, is like I at the same time I was listening to, you know, Emperor and Suffocation and, you know, Dillinger Escape Plan, I was also listening to Limp Bizkit and Disturbed and Linkin Park. Like I never really made too much of a distinction between what was cool or what was like, you know, there's a very elitist element to kind of underground scenes. And I've had moments of that, but I always kind of just, you know, I was always able to appreciate everything for what it was. You know, to me, it was always about, does it have a hook? Does it sound good? Does it groove? Does it have something that's, you know, and that's what one of the great things about, I think, live shows is, let's say you go see a band that maybe you weren't that into or it didn't really connect with you, but then you get to see how their audience connects with them, and then you get to kind of understand it in a different way. So I just think just being open minded is really important to kind of, because even if you don't like something in terms of like, oh, I would listen to this in my spare time. I think it's really helpful to just learn how to appreciate things that even if it's not necessarily your tastes. And there was this God forbid song called Broken Promise where we did a live arrangement of the song to make it more impactful and more kind of work with crowd participation. And I completely stole that from Limp Bizkit when I saw them on the Summer Sanitarium tour. With they did this whole thing for Break Stuff, and I was like, that's brilliant. And you know, like I said, at the time, you know, they weren't my favorite band, but I was like, and people were hating on Limp Bizkit. Like it was this weird thing where they were just getting so much hate from the crowd, but they kind of also got the crowd's respect at the same time, you know, and that was just something that was very impressive to me.
All right, cool. Yeah, my introduction to like heavy metal music was Linkin Park, and then I got into new metal when I was in high school, which is kind of odd because I was in high school like just 4 years ago, I guess. So like 2000, well,
New metal
2012 was,
lives.
yeah, like it was 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015, whenever I was in high school. And that's when I was like really into new metal, and everyone else around me wasn't into new metal, so like it was kind of odd.
Yeah, I
But
mean, but that's no different
yeah.
than me, you know, being in high school, you know, in 1994, and I'm listening to like Megadeth Rust in Peace, which came out in like 88, or I'm
Yeah.
listening to, you know, so it's, you know, and that's okay. I mean, you know, you kind of, whatever you connect to is what you connect to. I mean, there are some people who are like in the 90s, there was like a big kind of 70s like rehash, you know, it was like the Black Crows and Lenny Kravitz, you know, they were doing like this 70s thing, or and that's what they connected to. So I you know, or look at what's the band now, Greta Van Fleet. I mean,
Yeah.
they're young kids, and all their influences are all these classic rock bands from 30 and 40 years ago. So I, you know, I think you can't let your era define you or say that you have to be blank. Whatever you connect to is what you connect to.
Yeah, and then now that I'm out of high school, new metal's pretty much come back in like this really weird way where there's the newer bands that are like new metalcore type bands. And that's been interesting to look at, like I Prevail and Issues
Yeah.
and stuff like
Even
that.
even Bad Wolves has a lot of new metal influence, and that's on purpose.
Yeah. Yeah. Because like it's funny because I think of y'all more as like a groove metal ish bands, but like I was able to get into it. I like if Battles had come out when I was like 15 or 16, I probably wouldn't have given it much of a listen past like the singles, but because I got older. And I guess in a way my taste kind of matured a little bit because I was able to get into like some other stuff like Butcher Babies, like I was able to like gravitate towards it like real well and real quickly. So it was pretty interesting because back then I was like I listened to like a lot of like rock music and metal music, but I mostly like only bought like new metal CDs. So like it's been interesting to see me kind of branch out from just new metal in the last couple of years. So yeah.
Yeah, gotta
Um,
gotta gotta branch out, but it's these things kind of persist for a reason, I think, because people still connect to it. That's just it is what it is.
yeah. Um, so now let's start getting into politics
All
here.
right.
So what would you classify your politics as? Would you consider yourself like a leftist or a liberal? And what made you interested in politics?
Um, I would describe myself as kind of center left or like with like neoliberal sensibilities. Um, in that I definitely when it comes to just pure policy, um, if you were to kind of look at who presents what, I tend to align uh, with more left of center policy ideas. I'm for a free market. Like I'm not one of these people who thinks like capitalism is the end of all. I think there are many benefits to a capitalist system, but I think it needs uh, restraints so that it doesn't go overboard. I probably politically would feel more comfortable, in Western Europe, in terms of like what I kind of enjoy. It's, in terms of being a little more collectivist, in how we kind of attack problems, you know. But and I would say my political background really, has a lot of it has to do with my father because he was a real kind of Irish Catholic Kennedy Democrat, and his family was that as well. FDR, that all that kind of New Deal, stuff, was stuff that they really highly valued. Unions and public education, a social safety net, and even though my father is much more left wing than I am,
Yep.
he is. I would describe him as pretty partisan, and I believe partisanship pushed to its extreme, or not even as extreme, even in modest forms, left or right, is blinding. And so I'd say I became politically activated after the George Bush Jr. was elected in 2000 because of all the controversy about how the election was decided in Florida in the Supreme Court. And then 9/11, not too long after, I think that activated a lot of young people because, during the 90s, really, actually even go back to the late 80s, I mean, basically, you have the end of the Cold War up until the 2000 election, that you could just, the economy was good. We didn't have any really big wars. The AIDS epidemic had pretty much died down. The crack epidemic had pretty much died down. So it was like like you just didn't think about politics that much. Like that's what people don't, when you have context, it was just a real like easy breezy, like life is good kind of time. And 9/11 kind of changed that, and everything got really serious and everything became really high stakes. Like when Clinton was impeached, it was like it was all about sex scandal. But that's how uh light things were, that we couldn't even argue. Like all this shit, like everyone's like, the Clinton crime bill in 94, no one was talking about that stuff in 94 because crime was bad. Everyone's like, yeah, stop the crime, right? All they cared about was the semen on the dress because it was exciting. Like that's how boring it was, that's what we had to talk about. So yeah, so I became activated by that. But during that period, I was, watching Michael Moore documentaries and really understanding things from a very left perspective. And it took me years to kind of understand that I was only hearing half of the story, and that you really have to give people from an alternate point of view benefit of the doubt, that just because they think differently you, that they're not coming to it with bad intentions. And that it really is two wings of the bird, and that both sides do balance each other, and that there are solid perspectives on both sides of the political spectrum, and if you're not willing to hear that, then it shows your kind of lack of I just think people who are very partisan, I just think are less. I think it shows that you're really less. It's a lack of intelligence. You have to be able to see the whole picture to understand things.
Okay. Had a question, but I just lost it.
That's all good.
But that's interesting. So like I remember like when I was a kid, I was always kind of interested in politics to some degree. Like I watched like Michael Moore documentaries when I was growing up, like Sicko, I think was the first one I watched, and then Capitalism: A Love Story. He helped form my politics a lot when I was growing up. So that's really cool to hear that. So yeah, let's see. Why do you think that the Democrats lost in 2016?
Um, I think it's a lot of reasons, and I think the main thing to really understand is any person that tells you it's one reason usually has an agenda they're trying to reaffirm, right? So basically, if you hate Hillary, it's like, well, Hillary blew it. She was a bad candidate. One reason, right? Well, they lost because Trump had a message, right? It's about, they lost because of the Russians, right? Listen, it's about 100 reasons. And you can go through, I think, top number one is, I think, Trump, the system is kind of just set up for its advantage towards Republicans currently because of how the demographics have shifted, and the way the electoral college weights votes, and that's just kind of the way the tide went. That's not really like because there's something crazy. So I think there's a kind of a little bit of a statistical advantage there. I think people that voted for Trump were voting for something, like we want the wall, we want, to lock her up, whatever whereas I feel like I don't really know what Clinton's message was, I'm with her. What does that mean?
Mhm.
Um, so, the second reason is I think Trump just got extremely lucky. I think the wind blew. I think if that, 538 on the day of the election gave Hillary Clinton about a 66% chance of winning. So that's only 2 out of 3. So, you run a model 100 times. Trump wins, 33 of those times, and that's not that low odds. It's really not. So, and I think, basically the Comey report that was released that week, just basically if they looked at everyone who was undecided, all the late breakers most of them went towards Trump, and I think that had a lot to do with it. I think Trump is an unprecedented candidate, and so you couldn't use previous elections and precedent to predict, because things were, and honestly, and you could say that for future elections as well. Um, just how much social media affected everything, how much this influence, and really the thing that I don't think we understood about Trump's tactics is that so when he started running, he was the most disliked person in America. Think about that for a second. He had the highest unfavorabilities of any person to ever run for president. And the way he won was not to become more likable, it was to drag his opponent down in the mud with him and make her just as unlikable as he was. And you know what? It worked. It actually was effective. Um, by the end, Hillary Clinton was so disliked that months, years after the election, they still talk about her. Like the Republicans, they talk about her like she's the president. Like
Yeah.
people hate her in a way that's visceral and not logical. It's just a feeling. And he literally, I mean, Trump was like, she's the devil, she's a demon. That's literally what and so if you believe your opponent is literally a demon or a devil, can you get any more unlikable than that? And then all the conspiracies are like, well, they're, kidnapping babies and raping them in pizza places. Like do you know
Yeah.
what I'm saying? That's a level of, so, and I think that tactic is something we've never really seen, is to be really unlikable, but then be willing to go to such lengths to drag your opponent in the mud. Um, so and I like I said, I know there was interference, but to some degree that stuff has always gone on. Like trying to muck up everything. So yeah, I don't think Hillary was a particularly great candidate, but she did win 3 million more votes. I think that does count for something. That the system is set up currently to not favor Democrats because of how that population tends to coalesce in urban areas.
Yeah. I don't disagree with anything you said. I agree that it was multiple reasons why the Democrats lost. That was the first election I got to vote in.
And they
So
underestimated him. I'll say that. I think
yeah, yeah,
they didn't think he had a chance. I remember David Plouffe, who was Obama's campaign manager, or he did something. He was one of the main guys of the campaign. He went on Pod Save America the day of the election, and he's like, he literally like, this dude screwed me up because he was like, man, everyone needs to stop freaking out. It's in the bag. He has no chance, and I'm like, that's David Plouffe. Man, I'm good. Do you know what I'm saying? So that overconfidence, and I remember listening to like Nate Silver and people like that who do like they just couldn't. The idea that he could win was so unimaginable that they could not visualize it. So I remember when Hillary first walked on that debate stage and she looked at this dude like, how is this person even on here? Like she didn't respect him. And so when you don't respect your opponent, then they can get you.
yeah. I remember thinking that he could win. Like I was like, oh, I think he could win. I don't think people should just ignore that idea. They should take it a little bit more seriously. And I got to vote. I voted for Bernie in that primary, and I thought Bernie would have been able to have a better shot against Trump. But still, I think that the Democrats, a lot of what they did wrong in 2016 was they just didn't really they did have, like, Hillary did have a decent platform, but like she chose not to like actually campaign on it. She just mostly campaigned on how bad Trump is.
Yeah,
And
and that's
that
and that's
yeah.
the like I said, because there's no precedent for someone like him, there's no playbook, right? So he's kind of writing the playbook. She had way more money. She had, and this is the idea of the kind of like feeling anointed, like it's just your turn. Uh, it's just not a great way to do these things. And I know people kind of see similarities between that and Biden. And I think there are some, but I don't think it's that direct. I honestly think Biden didn't want to run for president, but he kind of looked at the polls and he realized like, people kind of want a dependable old white dude. And he's like, I probably am the only one that can win. and because they felt like maybe there was an element of the people that just didn't want to vote for a woman, or maybe they just didn't want to vote for Hillary. Like Hillary's very very very, very polarizing. Um, so I totally get people being like, oh, they're just gonna run another establishment candidate, oh, another old person. But it's like, listen, Joe Biden won the primary. I voted for Bernie too in 2016 and 2020. But he got his ass whooped. I'm sorry. They cheated. How'd they cheat? People can't tell you how they cheated, but it's like, oh, it's like he lost Michigan by like he lost
20
every
points almost.
he lost
Yeah.
every county in Michigan. So how you gonna tell me if Hillary lost Michigan, we're gonna if Bernie can't and Bernie won Michigan in 2016, how are you gonna tell me he's going to beat Trump? That doesn't make sense. So ultimately, that's what we have elections for. The Democratic base did not, overwhelmingly won. By the way, um, turnout was up 30% in the primary between 27. So more people voted and they chose Biden. So I can sit here and say, I don't think Biden's a great candidate. I think he's too old. I think he has some cognitive decline. But I don't get to like people, like I said, they think politics is like Netflix. Like I could just pick any movie I want.
Yeah.
I could just, oh, you're talking junk to me. I'll block you. No, life ain't that way. Certain shit you just don't get to choose, you know? Or you get a vote, but you don't get the only vote. And we have a very um immature outlook collectively, and a lot of it I think has to do with partisan media, because if you listen to any partisan media, they tell you their whole job is to tell you what you should be angry about, and you know what, you're not angry enough, and everything's unfair, and they're screwing you over. And if you just absorb that all day every day, you're gonna be like, you're gonna take to the streets because you're like, the system is screwed. It's weighted against me. It's everyone thinks, guess what? Everything thinks it's rigged against them. There's not one sector that thinks everything's fine for them. It's true.
Yeah. So I remember you made a tweet about how you said you thought Biden's VP choice should be Susan Rice. Why did you think she would be better as opposed to Warren or Harris?
No. I said thought she would be. I preferred her. I never thought it was going to be Warren because I actually think there is a fear sometimes of the main candidate being like overshadowed by their VP choice, and I think that was the fear with Warren, is that she would just overshadow him and kind of take some of the steam. And I think there's just, unfortunately, I think a big problem with the Democratic establishment is they don't respect the left wing of the party. They just don't respect them, and the truth is they shouldn't. You can't. You kind of don't have to respect them until they prove they can win. You know, um, and like how Buttigieg and Klobuchar and I forget the third one, they all dropped out at the same time and it helped Biden win.
Yeah.
But if Bernie and Elizabeth Warren would have brokered a deal and said, all right, one of us is going to drop out, and then
Yeah.
whoever wins, will be the VP. But honestly, I think Elizabeth Warren thought, she's like, you know what? I'm better than Bernie. I'm better than Biden. I shouldn't have to drop out. I agree with her. She was my number one choice overall, and probably Buttigieg second. Um, so and then probably Bernie. But some of that is not about policy, because the problem is a lot of times I think we actually put a little too much emphasis on policy because we're not electing a dictator. They're not a king. They don't come in and wave a magic wand. For me, it's often I think style does matter, and kind of being able to kind of galvanize people and having a certain presence. And that's something I think Buttigieg did really well, just the way he has a way of speaking. And I know it turns a lot of people off. People find him a little too they think it's a little too prepared, a little too stuffy, but that's also why I like Susan Rice, very measured, very calm. I just think Kamala, I literally don't think she helps in any. I think it's literally a net, maybe slight net negative because but I think she's the complete safe and most predictable choice. But it's basically you have someone who her voting record is actually very liberal, but she's perceived as not being liberal by leftists because of her history as a
Attorney
prosecutor,
General. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so because of that, she's black, but she's not, you know, she doesn't really have huge support with black voters because of that same history. Um, and then by the right, they think she's Che Guevara or some shit. So
Malcolm X.
you know, and the
Yeah.
and the and the truth is what they're gonna do and what you've seen is no matter who the Democrats put in there, they're gonna say you're electing Antifa because
Yeah.
they are not playing a fair game. They're just gonna say whatever, right? So, but the truth is, it's a very establishment, very mainstream Democratic ticket that is not going to do crazy reform in any real way. So I think it was the safe pick. But here's one thing I will say about Kamala is I think the number one most important thing in politics is charisma, and that's what she has. She has charisma, um, and so yeah. I just think it didn't really add anything, and I think honestly, if all the entire protest movement and Black Lives Matter movement happened, I think the pick actually would have been Klobuchar. But and then so because all that happened and her history as a prosecutor in Minneapolis, and then they decided they wanted to pick a black woman. That's what swung it to Kamala because I think they have no bravery. The Democratic Party, they do the safest, most
Safe.
vanilla thing every time. Like who was
Yeah.
excited when they picked Tim Kaine?
Tim Kaine.
Who was there? Tim Kaine was from Virginia. No one, not one person in Virginia was like, great, Tim Kaine. He's like, but the truth is, so when you have a presidential election, there's only two areas you can pull from because you're going to get about 42 million people to vote for either party no matter what. Like this cup could run and you put an R on it, it's going to get 42 million votes. D, 42 million. Doesn't matter, right? So all you're really fighting for is people in the middle, right? And then the far fringes of your party. Okay, so you have independents who go left or right, or people who are on the far. So what they've kind of decided is we don't really care about the left wing of the party. They don't. They think they're like, no, we're gonna go for the middle, and that's why during the Democratic convention it was like we have Colin Powell speaking, we have John Kasich speaking, because they're going for that disaffected Bush Republican, which I don't think there's many of those people left anymore. I'll be honest. Um, those are I love people who I love. Where are the Bush Jr. voters? Those people like disappear. They pretend like it's like people who bought like a Creed album and act like they didn't buy it. It's like, stop lying. All right, I know you're out there. So, um, and that's the choice. That's the choice they've made. And listen, I same thing. I think if the election were held today, I think Biden, has a very, very, very good shot of winning and probably winning overwhelmingly. But I think this is going to be a very difficult couple months. I think the mail-in thing is a real issue because it's going to take days for this stuff to get counted. And if Trump is ahead on the night of the election, he's going to declare victory. And it's going to be a constitutional crisis. And it's going to be a real scary moment for this country. So yeah, I think we're in for a rough one. Like I said, I do not think Biden is a great candidate. I don't know if he's going to be a particularly great president, but like I said, I will vote for anyone other than Donald Trump. Like that's who I'm voting for. People like you for Biden, like yo man, I don't care. Biden did what? He stuttered. Is he Trump? No, got my vote. I don't care who is like. There's not one motherfucker I can think of worse. Maybe Duterte if that motherfucker was running or like one of those. No, that's what I'm voting for, not Trump, because I think his influence is so negative to the psychology of the country that is the number one thing. Policy is part of it, but it's about our mental state as a people, and he's the most divisive. We're more divided now than ever, and that's how he wins. He divides and conquers.
All right. And so what exactly made you choose Bernie? Like you're in California, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, so you went Super Tuesday just like I did here in
Hmm.
Oklahoma. So were you planning on voting for someone else beforehand, and then you saw the results of the first three states and then made your decision, or what was?
Yeah, I mean
Yeah,
at that time, Bernie still had a shot to win, so I would have voted for I probably would have voted for Warren if, she had a really nice surge at a certain point. She was getting really great crowds, but she couldn't kind of crack that 10 to 15%.
yeah,
Um, and so it seemed, especially in the early states, Bernie was ahead. He had won two or three states. So, it's just policy. Like I said, I think you need some sort of nationalized health care. I think that's like obvious. It's just so these things are it's radical. It's not radical. Every country in the West has some form of nationalized health care. However you want to. There's different, single payer, however you want to kind of call it. Every system's different. There's not one system, but that needs to be figured out. Uh, you know, free college, I don't know if I necessarily agree with his exact sentiment in terms of how it would be structured, but college used to be very, very affordable in this country and education. And I think, you know, uh, I do think there is a little bit with Bernie, like the class president that's like, free Twizzlers and Reese's peanut butter cups in the lunchroom, right? And you just like, I think a little bit is like, okay, this stuff is great, but how are we going to get it passed? I don't. Even if Bernie became president, how do you get nationalized healthcare passed? I don't know, and I don't think he knew, and he wasn't necessarily a great coalition builder, um, and that was kind of, I think, a big reason why he lost. But here's the thing: I do think that's the future of the party. I think, let's say Biden loses, right? You get 4 more years of Trump. There's no way AOC is not running. And, and but the thing is, she has charisma and she's like, believes a thing, like I think someone like that who is more, unfortunately, like Bernie's message, he is probably not the best conduit for it. He's a 70 something year old,
yeah,
old dude. Um, and you need the right vehicle for ideas, and it's not always, and it doesn't mean Bernie didn't have charisma or he didn't have something, but I think the big, unfortunately, I think Trump has broken the left. They're shattered. Their psyche is frail. It's like a dog who's been abused, and they don't know which way is up. And unfortunately, what instead of they've taken the exact wrong lessons from 2016, which is they've gone more inside and more in their bubble, and and the events recently have kind of proven that, like, these defund the police. Like, I get the deep policy elements of it have a lot of validity, but the messaging is just bad, and people don't want that. Especially when they feel like there's riots in the streets and it's chaos. They don't want less police, they want more police. And that's them fundamentally not understanding people outside of their circle. And so I think, and that's ultimately, like I said, every time there's one of these, because the thing is, you have a black person getting shot or beat by the police, video goes viral, then there's a protest, then the protests turn into a riot or a fire or property damage, and then that cycle repeats. But that once it becomes that helps Republicans. They love that you're just making campaign ads for them every time you set a building afire, every time you do something, like, and they don't really get that. And but I don't think a lot of those people some feel like that's how connected to Biden. No, it's not. If you're like an Antifa warrior, you do not give a fuck about Joe Biden. You're like trying to, what I'm saying? Like, they're on some other, I don't even know what, and the thing is, I think a lot of these things get turned into caricatures. It's not even like, it's like, I'd rather talk to someone who's from that perspective than make a bunch of assumptions.
yeah. Let's see here. you kind of answered a couple of my other questions here.
Yeah.
But you really think that AOC should or could run for president and win in 2024?
Well, here's what's going to happen. So I think no matter, so let's say if Biden wins, he's only going to be a one-term
One
president.
term, yeah.
So yes, I could definitely see Kamala being primaried from the left, which I think is fine. That's okay.
Yeah.
Let the war of ideas happen. Let people decide that. Listen, I think the future is on the side of the far left, but they don't. But when you don't have historical context of how things kind of envelop, like I said, people. I've had this argument with people on Twitter all the time where they're like, they think progress. It's rare when you have a situation like gay marriage, right, where there's one Supreme Court
And then
decision
boom.
and
Yeah.
overnight it's legal, right? That almost never happens. If you go back to the late 60s and the protests, they thought that drugs would be legal in like the 70s, right? Because they're like, we're doing all this stuff and we're moving, and it's like, that movement had a big backlash, right? So that's you're talking 72, Nixon, Law and Order, silent majority. And the only reason, and then he, and this is when he gets reelected, he wins 49 states, wins at 60% of one of the biggest blowouts ever. And the only reason he's kicked out is because of Watergate, right? So, and then, and because of that, the backlash to that was Carter. And Carter, one of the most liberal presidents we ever had, and people hated him, right? And then you get Reagan and Bush. So all these ideals of the 60s, kind of created a chaotic culture that a lot of the normal kind of suburban Americans thought was like, oh, I'm talking about, in the 70s you had insane crime levels. You had, probably the biggest shift towards liberal policies, a lot of the welfare policies and things like that. And so that was a backlash that happened in the 80s. That's the whole Reagan movement, was stopping welfare, tough on crime, lower taxes. And that's so, listen, that Reagan shit didn't work. He built that economy and recovery on just not cutting taxes and not paying for it. I mean, and so it doesn't work, but people don't understand that, you got to look at history and see, like, yeah, I know you want this, and this, but it don't happen overnight. And the way you get it done is you have to be able to convince a plurality, or at least close enough, right? You don't need to, because not everything is like, this is why we're not a direct democracy, right? Like, because you can't have the majority voting on the will of the minority, right? So everything is not always going to be more than 50% popular, and that's okay, but you still got to be able to convince enough people. But if it's just you and your homies in Brooklyn and San Francisco, that's not enough. And so it's just the division and the partisanship is the most difficult thing, and no one's hearing each other. Everyone thinks the other person's evil, and that's the worst part about our current level of politics is, it's just gotten worse. And I noticed it back in 2016, and I've worked myself to be more open and to see more people and listen to people, even if I disagree with them, to understand them. But collectively, that's not happened. The opposite has happened.
Yeah, I agree with you on a lot of that, because I'm on the, I guess you could say, far left. I wouldn't say far left, but I'm a DSA member and whatnot, but I'm also active in Democratic Party politics. And a lot of people on the left, I see this on Twitter all the time, they're like, oh, there's no way we could ever work within the Democratic Party. And I'm like, I don't understand how you think that, if you, A, have any kind of understanding of history, or B, can see that there's already socialists and leftists getting elected as Democrats to Congress and the state legislatures all across the country. Like, it'll take time before we ever get, like a, progressive or leftist president. And I always give the example of, George McGovern losing in 72 and then Bill Clinton winning in 92. Like that was like a whole 20-year cycle of the people within the Democratic Party turning the party to the right, and it took time. It didn't just happen
I know,
overnight,
but the
and
whole
it was
point is Bill
yeah.
Clinton basically won. Well, one, you got to remember that election. If Ross Perot doesn't run,
Yeah, he
maybe
probably loses. Yeah.
maybe Bill Clinton loses, right? We don't really know. Ross Perot kind of took votes from both sides, but he didn't win with a great plurality. He came in, it was pretty unpopular, and he basically ran as a Democrat Republican. You know, outside of like the raising taxes slightly, outside of the assault weapons ban, all his economic policy, was pretty right wing. He had a welfare reform bill that removed a
Yeah.
lot of funding for that. People talk about the sister soldier moment and kind of talking down to black people in that moment, the crime bill. Um, so, and the truth is there's a name for that. It's called centrism, right? Listen, a lot can be said for George H.W. Bush. Very centrist and not, was not an extreme right wing person in any form, you know. And so, but people tend to, so if you're on the far end of the left spectrum, you'll see that. You say, well, Bill Clinton, look at him. He's just what they call, the Republicans, they call a rhino, right? Republican in name only. And there's not a left version
Yeah,
of
there
that.
is. There
What's
is.
the
It's
name? What's
Dino. It's Dino.
Dino?
Democrat
Okay. Yeah.
only.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I get that, but the problem with people who criticize those kind of centrists is like, listen, man, there's one thing to be on the sidelines and talking about stuff. It's another thing to be in the position. And I think our system is kind of set up for the executive to be centrist in many regards because if you look at the way laws are passed, you need 60 votes in in the Senate to get a lot of stuff passed. So that requires a certain amount of consensus building. And because things are so polarized, we've kind of stopped doing that, and the truth is, I mean, when's the last time Trump passed a law for anything? He literally does everything by executive order because that's the only way he can get anything done. It's like wants to build the wall, they give him like 3 billion. Oh, I'm just gonna find a workaround and say it's a national emergency and literally take money from military funding to build my part of the wall, which is basically most of which was there was already something there anyway. So we got to this point where we're saying where someone campaigns on some stuff, right? Makes a bunch of promises they can't keep, and then subjugates the system so that they don't have to actually get any broad support. That's fucked up. All right. And both sides do it. I mean, you look at when Obama came in, he was really trying to be post partisan and he really tried to include the Republicans. And they were just like, look at this fucking idiot trying to play nice. We're not gonna play nice. Fuck him. Right? Mitch McConnell, our number one goal is to make sure he's a one-term
One
president.
term
That's all he
president.
cared about. That's all he cared. So Obama, when he had the Senate and the House, used all his political capital on healthcare, and there was an immediate giant backlash. Tea Party, what everything, the losing both in 2010, they got a big backlash, and that was pretty much it. And so after that, if he wanted to do anything, he had to do an executive order. Listen, and he did a lot of executive orders, and some of them toothless. It's like after Parkland, they put out a list of policy proposals surrounding
Yeah.
gun laws, but none of them got done.
Yeah.
So, and like I said, the system is kind of set up for gridlock, and to some degree, that's good because because people don't realize, like, look what happened after the ACA was passed and how people flipped out. That's change. You know what I'm saying? People like, hope, change. We want change. But when you actually change shit, people flip out. So that's why change does have to kind of come incrementally because people, like I said, they take to the streets. It gets rough out there. So And and I get it. I think when we're younger, we're more idealistic, we're more energized, and that's why people tend to kind of get more conservative as they get older. Um, so a lot of, like I said, a lot of those people who were protesting in the 60s were wearing a sweater vest and voting for Reagan in the 80s. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So like, uh, and, and so I get that with me. I'll be 40, this year, and like I said, I don't think I've become more conservative per se. I've just I just understand and can empathize with a conservative perspective more, and I can understand. Oh, I see where you're coming from. I don't necessarily agree with your policy ideas, but I think your mentality isn't wrong. And that's, I think some people just really get into that, and right now it's all culture war. Like people like Ben Shapiro, right? All he really cares about is the culture war, right? It's like who said what at the Oscars, who did, it's like this kid, who shot some people, the 17-year-old, I'm forgetting the guy's name.
Kyle.
Yeah, that is a culture war, right? It's about picking, and I guess to a certain degree, any of these, police shootings become part of a culture war too, because it's like, whose side are you on? Are you
Yeah.
on the cop side or are you on black people's side? And it's like, and there's no in between. And it's like, and a lot of the stuff is about how are you organizing and aligning your tribalism, and it's the most corrosive element of all this, um, because it is like what Twilight. Remember, was like Team Jacob,
Yes.
team
Edward.
handsome guy with his shirt off, whatever, sexy werewolf, and that's what we are, and because that's what gets clicks, that's what gets views, is what would they call a wedge issue. It's all about stuff that kind of feeds to your gut and your lizard brain, right? It's like a visceral reaction. Someone's coming for your gun. It's like oh, what? They're killing babies, or it goes after your gut, right? And this is, and we're now making almost everything a wedge issue, right? So the coronavirus response, it's all culture war. Are you
Yeah.
team mask? Are you team no mask? Right?
Which is wild.
Yeah, but that's because that
Yeah.
we can kind of calculate what actually moves people, right? So if I can through data, if I'm like a media organization, right? I can literally look at all my articles, all my videos, and see how many views it gets, how much traction it gets, how viral it is, and then I find the stuff that works the best, and then create a formula so that all my stuff does that. And to me, this is the downside of capitalism. Capitalism incentivizes doing the thing that will make you the most money, right? So
Yeah.
if people like sensationalism, if people like things that push their buttons, and my media organization is for profit, then I'm going to do the thing that gives me the most profit. It doesn't make the media organization evil. They're just responding to the incentives that capitalism provides, right? There's a reason why, like, donuts and porn and video game, like all the shit that's worse for us sells the most. You know what I'm saying? It's the stuff we want, right? Because that's what the system. It's all about. I think if you had a system media wise, that a sector of the media that was that more nonprofit oriented, then you would get different results because you get different incentives.
All right. Have two questions left. So, what do you think will be the future of the Republican Party after Trump?
I think a few things. I think you're going to get a certain element of his fan base that gets amnesia, kind of like George Bush Jr., like pretend like they never had anything to do with him. I think you are going to see a certain, and a lot of, obviously things alter whether he wins or loses, right? So it's a different reality. It's a different reality. Um, I think you're definitely his children. I think you're going to see a certain amount of legacy there in terms of Don Jr. running or Ivanka running. But I do think if he loses, you will see a great splinter, and that kind of very similar to what's happening on the left, where there's literally like a left, leftist party that's completely different from the mainstream of the that party, or of the Democrat mainstream party. And then I think, but right now, essentially, the far right has taken over the entire Republican Party. There's no real moderate Republican Party. But I think if he loses, you will get a lot of people say, well, clearly that his style doesn't work. And I think what you're going to see is also a lot of Trump copycats, like people, upcoming politicians who try to borrow his style of like telling it like it is and talking shit and being abrasive. But I don't think they realize like he is uniquely talented at what he does. And I do think he's really one of a kind, and doesn't mean that style can't work again, but I just think it takes a very particular person. Like, he had a very unique background in terms of being a celebrity and kind of being inculcated in pop culture for the last 30 years in a way that really makes him unique. And like I said, he just, whether you like him or hate him, there is something about his communication style that is just really effective. To me, it's much like a hypnotist, right? Like, not everyone gets hypnotized, but those who do, it's really effective, right? So, so I think it'll be a combination of those things. Some people are going to pretend like he never existed. Some people, and it's going to create its own. It's going to be like a Trumpist, nativist, populist version of the party, and then there'll be some semblance of a new mainstream party. But we'll see. We'll see. I mean, listen, I always say the only polls that matter are the ones the week of the election. And the only polls I really follow are 538 because they're polling averages. So you're not getting random, they're just much better when you're taking 100 polls and then putting them all together and seeing, and then you take those same polls and look at it over time, you get a much better representative. But there's much better polling in states. Some of Trump's resurgence has been overstated, according to 538. But like I said, the last thing I'm going to do is be overconfident. I think it's going to be very nervousness. And like I said, Biden could. I just think what Trump pulled off last time is very unlikely. Like meaning winning Florida, Wisconsin,
Ohio, Michigan,
Ohio.
yeah,
Yeah.
and
I
Pennsylvania.
I
Yeah.
think pulling that sweep is going to be almost impossible. So even if he splits those, I think it's an odd amount of states. Um, I think Biden still wins. So but I would bet likelier that it's a Biden blowout than it is a Trump win. But like I said, if it takes days to count the mail-in votes and Trump's ahead during that time, I think it's going to be a really ugly time. And yeah, like, it's almost funny because we think about, November and it's over. It's like, no, he doesn't leave office till January.
Yeah.
If he loses,
Yeah.
then you have all that time. Who knows how much damage he'll pardon every fucking friend he ever had. It'll be really ugly, but I'll just we'll see. Like I said, but if he wins again, I think it's like Groundhog Day, when like they don't see the shadow. It's like 6 more weeks of winter. I think it's gonna be rough. It's gonna be really rough. I think the psyche of the country and the West and the world is going to be. I think it's gonna be broken, and I think some really bad shit's gonna happen. But not when I say bad shit like he's gonna win and there's gonna be a civil war. I'm not saying that. I hate the hyperbole that people kind of get into.
Yeah.
I just think, like I said, he's broken the left. He's broken them spiritually, and because of that, they have resulted in doing things that undermine their own cause. And he is such. His whole thing is he's a troll, and he's the best troll ever. He's the Michael Jordan of trolls, because the troll's whole point is basically get in your head and break you mentally, and he's done that. And so if it happens again, it's like that's it. There's no coming back. You're gonna see it's gonna be some weather underground shit. Like I think the far left is gonna be ugly. It's gonna be really ugly. So
All right. And last question I have here is, what like do you like where do you get your news from? You listen to any podcasts? What do you
Yes.
yeah.
So my main, well, so I subscribe to New York Times and the Washington Post. I mainly read the Times. They have a daily mailer. But I'm on Twitter and I follow, every AP, Reuters. So I kind of get general news from there. Um, as far as, because people, I don't think there's a lot of news literacy out there. So unfortunately, a lot of times people will say, "Oh, I'm watching the news on CNN," and they're watching like Anderson Cooper. I'm like, that's news analysis. It's news. And so you're basically having someone tell you, talk to you about a news story through their filters, and that's not really news. It's news entertainment, and so it's fine, but it's meant to get an emotional reaction out of you, and that's either one of those cable news. So I would definitely implore people, just don't watch cable news if you can avoid it, and if you do, just take it with a real grain of salt. Um, but so I also listen to the Daily, which is the New York Times podcast, and that's one story they highlight. So it's not like all the news, but I think it is really in depth, and I think I feel like they do get on the inside of a story, and I get people feel like there's biases. I don't think there's such a thing as news without bias. I don't think it exists, so I don't necessarily look for it. I just understand the biases. Um, the 538 podcasts, which is all about data, which so I like that perspective. Like, sir, anything that's too far left, I just had to stop listening. Like Pod Save America, I have to stop listening to because there's too much of an agenda, and it's the worst thing you want is political comfort food. You don't want people to just tell you the thing that you already believe and reinforce your own biases. Um, I just got this app called Grounded News,
Mm-hmm.
which is or Ground News, which essentially rates how what so you have a news story and it'll say who is reporting on it, center, left, or right, and then it'll even like tell you, all right, if you are someone who only follows left news, you probably missed this story. If you're on the right, you probably missed this story. And a lot of times people misinterpret. They think if I'm reading the Drudge Report, right, that they're just lying about things. It's not that. They just won't report certain stories that are antithetical to their aims. So, and same thing on the right, right? Or on the left, and if you're reading the Huffington Post, there's just certain stories they're not going to tell. So it's a kind of lying by omission to a certain degree. And just understand that it's so funny because Alex Jones, he called the site Infowars, and he was right that he started in like the late 90s, early 2000s. It is a war on information, and everyone is trying to get there, is trying to skew, spin the narrative so that you kind of understand things from their perspective. And you have to understand that everyone's trying to convince you of blank. And so, I just try and triangulate, so there's certain things I'm like, what actually did happen on this subject matter? And so I'll try and check it from a few different sources, and you just need some kind of corroboration, right? If you can get something that tells a very similar story across a few platforms, I think that's relevant. I think if you're one of these people that doesn't trust any media at all, but like trust some guy with like a YouTube channel who's like broadcasting out of like, some bunker, I think you've really missed the plot, you know, um, because you have to have, it's like, even those people I think are kind of bullshit, right? It's like, the same scientists you don't trust who, tell you that the earth is warming or that you need to wear a mask are the same ones that built your fucking iPhone, or the same ones that built the airplanes that stay in the air. There's the same ones like, so for some reason we tend to trust these people for certain things and then not when it comes to other things, and it's a bit arbitrary, and so yeah, so I think unfortunately, I think the job of learning what is actually happening at any given moment is a lot of work. It's too much work for people who are busy, who have kids, who have responsibilities. And so you kind of have to be vigilant. And sometimes going down these rabbit holes, it actually is detrimental to your mental health. So it's a tough time. You want to be informed, but you also don't want to be crazy. So it's just I just try and strike a balance, because it is a lot of times like picking at a scab, like if you read too much news, right? It's like, oh, there was a bombing in Yemen, and there was, these children were kidnapped in Ghana, and it's like, do you really need to know all that shit? Like, it's just upsetting you to know that bad things are happening somewhere. I hate to break it to you guys, bad things have been happening somewhere forever. And knowing about all of them all at one time is not necessarily helpful to your life. And people need to kind of realize that. And unfortunately, people, what they do is they take the one thing, like everyone now has a cause, right? So if my cause is, police brutality, all I'm going to do all day is watch videos of the police whooping people's asses. And I'm just going to get that same story ever again. Or if I'm worried about migrants coming over, I'm just going to watch videos of like migrants like storming walls or like beating up people or whatever. And so people kind of pick their poison and they just drink it up, and it's really corrosive because it just reinforces your own worldview. But people don't look out their window. Say, they're like, Portland's on fire. I'm like, motherfucker, do you live in Portland? Well, then shut the fuck up. Is there like people, like we're all like rubberneckers, like people who like watch accidents. That's what we all are, and it's bad, and it's on all around. Everyone does that, and it's just so. In a weird way, I'm saying the way you know more is by maybe knowing a little less. Save some of your stress.
All right. Well, that's all the questions I have here. Thank you for coming on. It means a lot for you to come on the show. I've enjoyed talking with you for the past hour or so. Where can we find you on social media, and where can we find your podcast?
Yeah, so all my social media is at .coyle, DOCCOYLE. You can go to my website, .coyle.net, and the X-Man podcast. Yeah, just anywhere where you listen to podcasts. It's pretty easy to find. Either put in my name or X. It's EX-man with .coyle. So, yeah, check it out.
All right. Thanks, man.